The Financial Times reports that last Saturday, protesters held public demonstrations against the planned construction of a waste incineration plant near the city of Hangzhou in Zhejiang province. The planned waste incineration plant would be the largest such plant in all Asia, expected to process 3,000 tons of waste each day in its first phase. Protesters, reportedly numbering in the thousands, joined the march against the incinerator plant, citing environmental and health concerns. Smaller protests had been occurring for weeks prior to Saturday's major demonstration, which led to the protesters blocking a major highway. Chinese state media reported that 10 protesters and 29 police were injured in the incident. When things died down, officials from Hangzhou promised to suspend construction of the large waste incinerator. In a statement on its website, the government of Hangzhou's Yuhong district said that all work on the incinerator had stopped, and it would invite the public to participate in a decision as whether to forge ahead with the project. To take a closer look at what net users have to say about this protest, let's cross over to the newsroom and our researcher, Julia Liu. Hi, Julia. So what exactly are the concerns from the protesters? What exactly is it that they feel unsatisfied with regarding the project? If the incinerator technology is sophisticated enough, does it really pose that big a threat in the first place?
Hi, Scott. Well, as for whether it's safe or not, well, there has been some debate. Well, there have been quite a number of articles published on China's mainstream media explaining how safe waste incineration is. For example, an article on QQ.com says that people have long been afraid of waste incineration since they feel that airborne pollution is quite scary. But the technology has already been used by many developed countries. It can help to decrease the volume of the garbage and even help to generate electricity. But apparently, the protesters don't really buy it. Many of them argue that while some expensive waste incinerators are environmentally sound, while many less expensive ones release heavy pollutants like dioxin and mercury, which persist in the atmosphere. And it appears that it's not just the residents in Hangzhou who hold this concern. Or during a poll on QQ.com asking people whether they'll accept a waste incineration plant around their neighborhood, well, more than 80% of the net users chose no, which reflects people's resistance to such projects in general.
Well, Julia, environmental protests have understandably been on the rise in China in recent years. Just earlier this year, we covered the story of protests against a paraxylene or PX plant in Maoming in Guangzhou, which also turned somewhat violent. Just how is that so? Do net users express opinions regarding that?
Well, first of all, it's of course due to the public becoming increasingly critical of pollution and health hazards from industry, as the industry grows at an unparalleled rate in China. Well, for example, Duan Jia Weifeng has this take on Weibo.com, saying, well, in this society surrounded by social media, it is no longer possible for the government to control all the information sources to stop the public from knowing about some of the truths. While people are getting more and more aware of things that they should have known. And besides this, in fact, another key phrase frequently seen from the quotes of the protesters is definitely that we don't trust the government. For example, quotes like this citizen in a report from Associated Press are quite common. He says that we just don't believe the government's words. They said that they would use European standards when they build the incinerator, but that there's no way to trust them based on their bad track record.
So where precisely is this widespread distrust of the government coming from? It must be based on some concrete reasons.
Sure, this anger or distrust, of course, isn't coming from nowhere. And people have quite a variety of reasons to offer here. Well, Liu Bin has this to say. Well, the standard of incineration in China and in other developed countries is quite different in the first place. Although many local governments claim that the incineration has reached the criteria of a decent standard, that standard is simply the national standard, which is much lower and considered unacceptable in other countries, which of course raises big concerns. And some point out that even with these low standards in China, there are many companies whose production plants don't even reach the low environmental standards in China. Well, this poster has this on Tencent.com, saying, well, just like our concerns for most public projects in China, what we worry about is the lack of appropriate supervision or enforcement from the government. Well, many real examples are out there. Just last year, we saw the Wuhan government apologizing for its illegal procedures when incinerating garbage. Well, meanwhile, there are also some questions raised by net users. Some questions that we've seen from our previous such protests too, actually. For example, this poster, 风杨树说同乡, says on Weibo.com. Well, the protesters say that they've never been asked or informed about the construction of the plant before. How is that so? People would surely feel it's unsafe, considering the government chose not to tell them about its existence.
Well, here are some figures. China's fast-growing cities produce around 160 million tons of domestic waste each year, and the country is planning around 300 such incinerators within the next 3 years. However, as we see, there have been repeated protests against such projects. So what is the government supposed to do to deal with such a situation? Any suggestions from net users?
Well, just as the previous net user indicates, many posters actually believe that more transparency from the government would work. And besides this, there are many net users who raise another suggestion: garbage classification. Well, we have this poster who has this quite specialized comments on QQ.com, saying, if garbage classification is performed better before it gets to the incineration plant, there will be much less garbage that needs to be incinerated. Garbage that is not classified would easily cause accidents and produce more pollution. And this poster's opinion does have a basis. Well, although Hangzhou started a pilot scheme for garbage classification 4 years ago, the additional roadside receptacles are now seen by many citizens as nothing more than extra trash bins. And I'd like to wrap up with this suggestion from Tang Ji-Wei-de on worker.cn.com, which says, well, it seems that China has put some effort into the garbage classification by setting up several pilot cities, but the effect is apparently poor. Well, more funding and more publicity to generate knowledge among citizens is needed. Anyway, for many problems in China, the implementation of the regulation is more important than just setting up new regulations.
Thanks, Julia. And that was Chinatech researcher Julia Liu with a look at China seriously running out of time to properly legislate and enforce hardcore environmental laws. Next up on Chinatech, some of the top trending phrases on China's most popular search engines.